Save big during Labor Day at Lowe's. Get up to 40% off select major appliances. Plus, buy more to get up to an additional 20% off. Shop even more savings with 3 Stay Green 1 cubic foot vegetable and flower garden soil bags for $10. This Labor Day, take care of your home for less at Lowe's. We help, you save. Valid through 9/3. Soil offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location. Select locations only. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real-life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. And today's episode is going to be a solo recap. Just me, myself, and I. I realized that when I got started with season 5, I had some really amazing guests. If you haven't listened to those episodes, please do. I've had Ryan Bailey, Amy Phillips, Lindsay and Brady from Recap Rodeo, of course, our dear friend Mandy Slutzker, Vanderpump Rob, so many amazing guests. I realized I kind of missed this, just the one-on-one talking to you, geeking about, the shows that we love. So today what I'm going to be doing is covering Real Housewives of Miami and Real Housewives of Orange County because, I think a couple months ago, I was like, yeah, I'm going to cover Miami. And then I covered it on Instagram and I got so trolled. It made me a little bit nervous and I just completely retreated. But listen, this podcast is my safe space. And I know, you all want to hear me talk about Miami. So today's episode, I'm going to be recapping the last 5 episodes of Miami. 5. Because for some reason, it's like not in my normal rotation to watch it. And so then I forgot and then I had to catch up and, then there was a lot. But I was like, great, you know what? I'll recap 5 episodes of Miami. And then I'm also going to talk about the most recent episode of Real Housewives of Orange County because, my goodness, it was a doozy. So before I get into all of that, 2 things. One thing I want to say is that just hi and thank you for, all the amazing people who are listening to this right now, the people who support me, who, in a million different ways. So I just want to say hi, thank you for being here. I appreciate you. And also I want to say thank you for really showing up for me. A couple weeks ago, I did a bite-sized bish about, just some difficulties that I was having with reviews and things like that. And people really stepped up, in many ways, whether it be doing, giving me a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast or, following me or, whatever. So I just want to remind everybody where I'm at and how you can best help me for those who haven't done so already. And for those who have, thank you so much. I see you and I appreciate you. So what you could do to help your girl out is to give a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you listen to. Follow me on social media at Your Bish Therapist. So this podcast comes out free everywhere on Tuesday, but if you're interested in ad-free, full video, bonus content, you can hit up my Patreon, www.patreon.com/YourBishTherapist. We have a community there. We do Zooms. We have chats. It's a whole thing. It's really fun. There's also Spreaker Supporters Club. There's my YouTube you can subscribe. So if you're interested in ad-free bonus content, full video, and perks, including communicating with me and the community at large, check out Patreon, YouTube, or Spreaker Supporter Club. And if you're questioning what is all that, wherever you're listening to this podcast now, go in the episode description and I have links to everything, including a link tree where you can find links to every single thing that I have done, all the episodes, all the content, etc. So that's the end of my spiel for this. And then the second thing I wanted to say is that I have had some challenges this week, which I am in the process of getting figured out. I posted a little bit on my Patreon. So that's the one thing I wanted to say is that I do tend to be a little bit more personal and open with what's going on Patreon because I just feel like that's my community of people who understand me and support me. once I have a better idea of what's going on, I will certainly chat about it. But until then, if you want some updates, head over to Patreon. So today's episode is going to be, there's so much to talk about. So I think I should probably just get into it. Real Housewives of Miami, by the way. Okay, so here's the thing I feel like with what's going on with the Bravoverse. I feel that the Valley being over is such a blessing and a curse because it was such like intense entertainment. And now that it's gone, I feel like it's like this vacuum that's left a void. But what's interesting is this morning I saw right before I started podcasting that Jax admitted that he love bombed and manipulated his employees in order to sleep with them. And he was generous enough to obtain them emergency contraception afterwards. So, I mean, here's the thing with Jax. I just have to say, I just really hope we never see him back on our screens because I'm not kidding. For me, for those who listen to the Vanderpump Robs episode with Rob Schulte, for me, that would be a bridge too far. If Bravo ever tried to bring this human being back into the Bravo zeitgeist, I feel like, if you hang around trash, you start to stink. Jax is, there's reality television personalities and they're human and all of this stuff. Jax is he's in a different category for me. And I just don't ever want to see him again. Hearing about him makes me angry enough. And I just want to say to women out there, respect yourself and don't give that man any attention. Like what? This is not a person that's a healthy person for anybody right now. So this man, Jack, should come with orange cones and crime scene tape around him at all times. He should just walk around with that. So that was a wild thing that I saw this morning. But otherwise, I feel like Real Housewives of Miami has really been giving. And so, for people who feel like the Bravoverse has been sleepy, which I do kind of feel that in some ways, because Real Housewives of Orange County for me it's so interesting. It's like a sociological experiment to see, how people are feeling about it. I did a poll on my Instagram and I think like a couple thousand people voted, but the results were that about 50% of people are not enjoying OC, but 50% are roughly. And then some people, it's like, I don't know, 20% of people are like, it's okay. So there are people who are really loving the season. For me, I am not. And I'm going to tell you why. I feel that Real Housewives of Orange County has kind of jumped the shark in terms of all of these storylines about, you know what? I'm going to talk about OC last because I feel like, first of all, I have 5 episodes of Miami to recap, number 1. And number 2, I didn't even cover one of the last episodes of Real Housewives of Orange County because I just felt like there wasn't much meat on the bone for me. It was just like, I feel like it's become this like Hunger Games, Traders hybrid sort of thing. And personally, I'm just not that into it. I prefer authenticity and it's just the content creator drama. And then now we're going back to the Naked Wasted storyline, which was 10 years ago. I genuinely don't like going back to the past. I think like as a therapist, one of the most ineffective things that we can do is just recycle the past, over focus on it, keep talking about it. We certainly need to look in the rearview mirror to adjust our current, journey. But the way that OC is just fixating on it and making now this is going to be a storyline for the new season, I just personally am not enjoying it. So, but listen, let's get into Miami because Miami, I am enjoying. Miami is giving culture. It's giving color. It's giving international travel. It's giving fashion in very interesting ways and different multicultural, many languages and all these other things. It's just really giving. And I think that from my my own perspective, I didn't give Miami enough credit. I really didn't. So I am extremely happy to be talking about it. And we're going to start out with episode 8, which is Dueling Yachts. That's the episode where I left off at. And so there were a couple things that happened even prior to this episode that I wanted to give my thoughts on. So remember the whole Julia throwing water on Gertie, which was absolutely unacceptable. My initial thought about that was that I think Julia felt hurt that Gertie didn't do something that she felt that she should have done. Like Gertie didn't actually do anything, but there was clearly miscommunication. And then both Gertie and Julia had hurt feelings. And then what they did with those hurt feelings was wild. And so, we never throwing something, putting our hands on people is never acceptable. And throwing water is, that's assault. That's never acceptable either. And so what I talked about was I think Julia, I think she's being triggered by the fact that she lost a child early in life. Her son was unfortunately passed away after being shaken by a caregiver that wasn't her. And so I think adopting these two boys has triggered some of that PTSD, some of that grief. Grief is a lifelong, painful, ebbing and flowing experience. And I just feel as a therapist, I can see when grief is driving the bus in terms of certain people's behaviors, like with Tamara on OC. I do really think that Tamara has grief. And so using this example, Tamara and Julia both have grief, but it's not an excuse to behave like an asshole either. And so I think that's really important. But, emotional maturity says that there's nuances, right? We're not saying that what Julia did was okay. I'm just here to explain what I think is going on but with that. So then cut to Gertie's cancer survivorship party where she read the text between her and Julia, which was just a bad idea. It was a bad idea for several reasons, in my opinion, because number one, the texts Gertie is looking for validation. She's looking for support and validation because as an immigrant, as a child, she came to this country not speaking any English and having no understanding of what's going on. So I think that trauma of coming to this country when she was a child informs her perspective and her feelings. Gertie tends to do what a lot of trauma survivors do, I believe, which is overcorrect. So I think that at her survivor party, she was looking for support because the ladies weren't understanding what she was so upset about, but she showed all these texts and they were just too long. Number one, the texts were too long. And number two, it was too hard to sift through them. They were just blobs of information. It wasn't a good presentation, if I'm being honest. It was just like, here's this information of which people are at a party and they're going to be like, what is happening now? But I think ultimately my theory about Gertie is that, as a 2-time cancer survivor and someone dealing with a chronic incurable cancer now, sometimes cancer survivors realize the ways that we've hurt ourselves by staying quiet. So I've always said our bodies express what we repress. And so within the cancer community, there's an understanding that, we didn't cause our cancer. Nobody causes their cancer. There's things that can cause cancer, like smoking and things like that. But nobody asks for this, right? Even when people make decisions and whatever, nobody asks for this. And so I think that Gertie feels that now she has to use her voice because if she doesn't, it's going to make her sick and keeping quiet will literally hurt her. But I think she's doing what humans do and she's overcorrecting by going too far, which is what happened at her cancer survivor party. And, case in point, Martina and Julia were talking about what happened at the survivorship party. And, Martina is a cancer survivor. She had throat cancer. She had breast cancer, which again is another reason that I think Julia has some unresolved trauma and grief emotions, because that's the other thing about grief. Grief doesn't give a shit about what it's actually about. Grief loves to generalize. It loves to generalize and be like, you're feeling grief about this? Well, guess how that also applies here. So people would be surprised how grief really permeates and, kind of comes out sideways. But Martina talked about it was she was like, was about her survivorship, and that was an odd choice. And I agree. As a 2-time survivor, I feel for me, I really felt I didn't love what Gertie did. I didn't think it was appropriate. I didn't think there was just nothing positive. Not only did it not help anything with Julia, it also took away from Gertie and what the night was celebrating. And so I think Gertie has been too kind of stubborn and had her heels dug in because she feels like she deserves support, and she does. But I think she's conflating a couple of things, and she's taking old feelings and applying them to current situations. And that's what gets trauma survivors in a lot of trouble, because it's like, yes, Gertie does deserve support and love because she's a human being. And of course she deserves that. But she also made a misstep. And I think that she has to be honest about that. Moving on to Stephanie, who is truly one of my favorite new housewives ever historically. I understand maybe why people aren't a fan, but I am a huge fan. I really enjoy her. But last time we were podcasting, Mandy and I were podcasting, Mandy said something about there was like some drama with how Stephanie met her husband Masood, and maybe when she met him, was he still married? And then, so that was interesting because this episode 8 of Dueling Yachts, we see Stephanie give Larsa a tour of her new home, which is Masood's home with his ex-wife. And what's very interesting to me is that Stephanie agreed to live in the house with Masood, but she rebuilt the house. I mean, she gutted it inside and out. She changed like the layout and the this and the that. And she said, I just didn't want him having memories of like that's where I was with her and, all that stuff. So I thought that was very interesting. But when Stephanie was showing Larsa her home, Stephanie has a closet that's 1,000 square feet. Okay. I live in a pretty decent sized house. That's like half of the square footage of my downstairs. That is crazy. Like either Stephanie and Masood are just filthy rich or they're fronting. It looks like they actually have money, as evidenced by the fact that not only is it 1,000 square foot closet, she's doing one wall for just Birkins, which, by the way, if you don't know, a Birkin is a handbag that is iconic. And they are no less than $10,000 and can go up to several $100,000 if it's like a specialty ostrich or something like that. And here's the funny thing about Yabish. I literally don't care about clothes. I mean, you all see how I show up to video myself. I'm too comfortable just walking around being ugly. I don't care about that. I really don't care. As long as my husband loves me, I'm set. That's all I need. But Yabish loves a handbag. And this started when I was young. My grandparents would take me shopping, and when I was like little, and I wanted cocktail purses. And I would store, whatever, my toys or, whatever. I've just always been such a handbag lover. And unfortunately, I love all of them. I just love a great handbag. So when she said she had a whole wall of Birkins, I was like, that's a millions of dollars collection. I thought that was really crazy. And then there was one scene too where they're going to Seville and Stephanie shows up with a Birkin that is literally like the size of me. It's the biggest thing I've ever seen. And it was $70,000, which is, again, like I mean, that's a house. That's crazy. That's so crazy. So anyway, moving on is that another note I had was that Alexia had a scene with her kids where she talked about how after her son Frankie's accident that left him developmentally and intellectually disabled, her other son, Peter, was visiting, and she talked about how Peter's life has been so affected by his brother's accident. And she talked about, just how this has impacted their family. And I really wanted to talk about that because, when I'm going to be very vague about this, but I have a friend who the spouse had a sudden and unexpected medical event and was legally dead for several minutes. They were revived. However, after they were revived, their brain had not gotten oxygen for a long time. And now the person has really significant disabilities and needs a full-time caretaker, and life is completely different. And so I just, understanding this personally and professionally, there's a grief that comes from you lost the person who you knew, but they're still here. And so whether it's, dementia or, neurological issues or physical issues, when you lose someone in the way that you've had the relationship with them and have known them your whole life, the grief of that is really intense and severe, and it's lifelong. Because, Alexia was talking about how even though Frankie was younger than Peter, Peter really looked at Frankie as like an older brother, a North Star, a guiding light. And now she talked about the grief of not only is she going to have to be caring for Frankie for the rest of her life, Peter is going to be having to be responsible for Frankie for the rest of his life. And so for a sibling, that's a tough role to need to take on. And so I just give Alexia, Peter, and Frankie a lot of love and support, because that's a chronic grief that you're going to have to grieve a million little losses time and time again. Have dreams and visions of, maybe your sibling at a wedding or having children, whatever it is. And then, these things happen and the person's no longer capable of these things that you thought you'd have. So there's just a lot of grief that's been in these episodes, which I also always love to, take the opportunity to talk about. And speaking of grief, Dr. Nicole and Gertie met. And I love seeing Dr. Nicole because I think that Dr. Nicole and Tiffany Moon, Dr. Moon from Dallas, they have a podcast about like being a professional, but also like being a housewife. And I just really adore them both. The podcast is great. And I just do wish she would come back to the show, but I respect that she needed to take a step away for her, for her family. But Nicole's dad died unexpectedly in 2024. And so she talked a little bit about the grief of that. But then what was interesting is Nicole and Gertie talked about the need to call each other on your stuff as a true friend. And they were talking about how Alexia kind of needs blind loyalty, but things are rarely black and white. I mean, rarely, if ever. And I think that, there's just different schools of thought. To me, Alexia is like the Teresa Giudice of Miami. That's for real. I feel like Alexia can be very black and white. She's very concrete. You're either with her or against her, and that's just not how life works. There's nuance in relationships, and all situations are different, and she just doesn't understand that. And so, but I just thought it was interesting that, there are different groups of people. Like I'm the type of person, I'm like Dr. Nicole and Gertie in that to me, my true friends, we have to be able to honestly, authentically check each other, tell each other when we're making missteps, letting each other know this is how I'm feeling. Like, I don't think you can have true intimacy without that personally. That's how I run my relationships. But there are some people who don't want to hear feedback at all unless it's, I love you, everything you're doing is perfect. And so for me, I can't be friend. That's not what a friendship is because nobody's perfect. And, I have to rigorously call myself out on stuff. So I expect the people around me to be able to hear feedback in ways that they need to hear it appropriately, nicely, and lovingly, of course. But I do think that's what it means to be a true friend. So I thought that was interesting. Gertie did ask Nicole, what would it take for you to come back? And Nicole just like coyly smiled and said TBD, and which I think means it's not happening and please don't ask me again. So then we see the dueling yacht parties, which was just so stupid because people can't get along. So on Kiki's yacht, it was Lisa, Gertie, Adriana, and Ebony, so Lisa's friend. And then on Lars's yacht, it was Marisol, Julia, Alexia, and Stephanie, who had to leave early because her husband was taking her to another country for a date night. Also, can I just say, I feel like there's some alarm bells going off for me that like Stephanie and Masood are just doing too much. It's like, I don't know. It's just something I'm noting in the back of my head. We're going to different countries. We're flying private jets. When Stephanie goes on the girls' trip to Sevilla, she's met with, bags and Chanel and rose petals. And it's like, I don't know. That just feels, there's romance and then it just feels love bomby. You know what I mean? There's no other way for me to say it. I'm dancing around it, but it just feels love bomby and it feels like it's showy. So I'm going to need to gather more information about that, but it's just on my radar. Anyway, so on the dueling yachts, Kiki and Adriana, people were like talking to Adriana about, okay, so Kiki tells Adriana about the issue with Marisol. And Adriana, like that Marisol didn't want to be on the same boat as her. And Adriana proceeds to show exactly why people don't like her. She got drunk and acted like such a literal fool. She was just like on the boat yelling, talking about Marisol's bony knees and being old and all this other stuff. And just like, here's the thing. I could tell that she probably was blackout. The one thing, again, growing up with addiction in my family and then working with it, you just know when people are not in the space to be able to engage, but they're like awake and conscious. And so I have this saying that, trying to reason with an intoxicated person is like trying to herd cats. It's just not possible. It's futile. Don't do it. It's going to make you crazy. So, she's just like going off and yelling and all of that. But it was like, she just needed to take a nap and go away. I mean, eventually she was able to apologize for that and acknowledge like, okay, I was too intoxicated and she apologized for it. But in the moment, it's just like, come on, man. You're a grown woman. This is wild behavior. So then at dinner, they did an exercise where, the people who were beefing needed to say something nice, about the person they're beefing with. And Gertie talked about her isolation and abandonment due to coming to a foreign country, not knowing the language. This is what led me to understand. She's overgeneralizing her trauma emotions. And she gets triggered by feeling unsupported. So again, feeling unsupported is fair. That's fair. But I think it's really important that we don't overgeneralize feelings to situations that don't apply because it just sets us up for failure. But listen, as someone who has complex PTSD, I do that all the time. I'm just really good now at knowing when I'm doing it. And it takes a lot of practice, like a lot. So if you're not there, that's okay. But it's possible to get there, I promise. And okay, so let's move on to episode 9, Preppy Petty People. One interesting thing at the top was that I guess Adriana took her dog to a brothel before neutering her dog. And I was like, that's interesting. And so we see We start to see in this episode that Julia is gravitating towards Marisol, who's apparently Adriana's arch nemesis, but Adriana doesn't realize how she's pushing her away. Like when, you get intoxicated and you start yelling about things and insulting people, like you're a part of the problem. So I think that Adriana's hurt, but she doesn't understand what is leading to some of this dynamic shift. Also, I thought it was interesting. Dr. Jackie from Married to Medicine made a cameo. She was talking to Gertie because Dr. Jackie is a 2-time breast cancer survivor. And what I really appreciated here was whenever Gertie talks about her survivorship, it just resonates with me so much because Gertie talked about how her intimacy with her husband has been impacted. I just wanted to discuss for a minute, like, how cancer, it changes our bodies and how we feel in and about our bodies, right? So like, for example, I always felt like my body hasn't been mine. It's, when I was 17, I had, doctors in my vagina all the time. Like it was, as a 17-year-old, just absolutely horrifying. Like doctors literally were living in my uterus. It was crazy. And then afterwards, I have tons of scars. Gertie has a port scar on her chest. I have the same scar. And I have a scar that goes from my pubic bone all the way up past my belly button and around it like a little keyhole. And so my point is that survivorship changes how we feel in our bodies. Sometimes, I can remember feeling like unsafe in my body, when you have cancer and it's the craziest feeling that all of a sudden you're just like not safe in your body. And, I think that I understand Gertie's struggle so much because it's not about, she and her husband, to me, she and her husband are like me and my husband. We've been together for so long, absolute soulmates, completely supportive and loving of one another, but it's not about that. It's about how her skin, her body has changed, how she feels about it has changed. And of course, that's going to change intimacy, right? Because it's like when you don't feel sexy, when you don't feel whole, it's hard to give yourself to somebody else. And so I just think that it was a great discussion in terms of like how our bodies can change after cancer and how we can become fearful and how it takes time to adjust to these new bodies that we don't really know. And I just have a lot of empathy for Gertie with that. So we see Martina and Julia have a date night with Steph and Masood, who Masood is obsessed with Martina, which was hilarious. He loves Martina. And listen, Martina is a rock star, one of the greatest tennis players, arguably ever, historically, of all time. And, but it was so interesting because Steph was talking about their boys, adopting their boys. And Steph she kind of put her foot in her mouth. She was like, well, how old will you be in 20 years? And Martina is 68. And it was just like, it was kind of an awkward reminder that, parenting at any age is challenging, but certainly there's challenges about parenting much later in life just for the longevity factor. So I just thought that was really interesting. But also Martina and Julia admitted that Julia's oldest daughters, Vika and Emma, or Vika, I don't know how to say that. They're upset about the new family dynamic and they're not really talking to them. Which, to be honest, seems fair because it seems like their frustration was the lack of communication about it. Not that it's happening per se, it's just that they didn't know. And, I don't know a ton about the situation, but I just feel like, when we're changing our family, merging families, you have to consider the people currently in the dynamic. And it seems like the girls don't feel that they were considered. And Martina and Julia, they've made a permanent decision for the entire family. And so, I just thought that was an interesting note. Also, Adriana, here's my question. She said she's getting her master's degree in psychology from Harvard. But then it's like, is she just taking a class or is she actually graduating? So if you know the answer to that, let me know. But I thought that was really fascinating. Is Adriana really going to have a master's degree in clinical psychology? I don't know. I'm going to have to do more research on that, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so then at the end of this episode, we see Gertie and Julia seem to repair in a more real way than we've seen so far. But then Alexia and Stephanie get into it, like the power of the queen bees, right? Because Stephanie is the new girl to this group, but she came in and laid her dick on the table and was like, I'm here. We're taking my private jet. I'm going to tell you what's up. And that's why I love her, by the way. I love a direct communicator. Ooh, do I love that. Me and Stephanie, we could talk about things all day. I love a direct communicator. It's honestly one of my love languages. But at the same time, she's new to this group and she definitely doesn't have any deference coming in, which is why I call Alexia the Teresa Giudice of Miami, because I feel like Alexia's like, listen, I'm an OG. You better kiss my ring and don't come in here swinging that dick around. And Stephanie's like, well, I'm going to. And I'm just here for all of it. But Alexia called Stephanie a chihuahua. And she was like, I'm a Rottweiler and you're a chihuahua. And then, Stephanie, of course, was like, that is so rude and offensive. And Alexia was like, I'm sorry if it offended you. The classic Housewives apology. I'm sorry if it offended you. That is literally, I would rather someone tell me to my face, fuck off and die, than I'm sorry if this offended you. Please take that mess somewhere else. That is not an apology. Not an apology. Okay, so moving on to episode 10, The Thrill of Seville. So the one thing I love about Miami is that, like I said, these housewives, they take trips to, the Jersey Shore and whatever. And these women are in Spain and it's one of the coolest cast trips that I've ever seen in my life. So of course they fly in a private jet, which the nonsense around Stephanie's private jet was so wild to me. She was like trying to offer seats to Alexia and Marisol, but then they were like, no, we have to be together. And I was like, I don't care who you are. I'm going to ditch anyone I love for a private jet. I don't care if it's my husband. I don't care if it's my niece and nephew. I'm going to go on a private jet. So I think it is insane that Marisol and Alexia declined that. But we see, Stephanie shows up with her $70,000 bag on her private jet, which, by the way, has cashmere floors. I mean, can I just make a comment about just like the insane distribution of wealth in this country? It's just like so insane that some people can't even afford to like feed themselves. And Stephanie has cashmere flooring in her private jet. It just blows my mind. And they joked how Stephanie was like Oprah because they come on the plane and she gives everyone masks, like LED masks that are already pre-charged and like pajamas. And Larsa was like, she's like Oprah. And I'm like, she is like Oprah. I would love to be the beneficiary of that. Please, Stephanie, if you're looking for a direct friend, here she is. So on the plane, they all kind of talk about Alexia and, Stephanie at this point is really angry with Alexia. She doesn't understand why people are just like okay with what's happening. But Stephanie is making the mistake that other people make, which is like, you can't expect everyone to dive in headfirst to your conflict. That's not appropriate. That's not healthy. That's not, I understand sometimes it's feels like loyalty, but that's nonsense really. But so Alexia comes in and Julia immediately like tells her that they've been talking shit about her, which Stephanie was like raging. She's like, I take you on my private jet and this is how you repay me. And there it is though with Stephanie. There it is. I don't like that where it's like, I'm going to do this for you. And then in a moment where I'm not happy with you, I'm going to weaponize that. I don't like that at all. If you're going to do something nice for someone, just do it and don't hold it over their heads. Otherwise, there's ulterior motives, in my opinion. So I didn't love that. But there was a funny scene where there was this flamenco singer who was singing this very emotional song to Alexia. And Alexia and Marisol were literally crying. They were moved to tears. And Larsa literally said, and I quote, I'm not feeling any emotion right now, end quote. I was like, Larsa, this is your trouble. This is why people have troubles with you, because you don't feel things that you should feel. And not just like on your face, like whatever you've done to your face. I'm sure she doesn't have feeling there too, but I'm saying like emotionally speaking, that was just a wild situation. So I think, being moved by music is actually a very cool thing. I'm someone who's very moved by music. I get goosebumps and things like that. And so Larsa's just, she doesn't feel a lot. So I don't think she totally understands that. Okay. Now, let's talk about Lisa's chronic lateness and how different lateness is managed on different franchises. Okay. So Stephanie comes into this group basically, like a boss and saying, being on time or being late is her pet peeve. And here's what I'm going to tell you and be honest. I also have the same pet peeve. My grandfather always instilled in me, if you are not 10 minutes early, you are late. And lateness is disrespectful and not to be tolerated. And so that's how I roll. And in fact, a lot of my practitioners appreciate it. I'll go to doctor's appointments and they'll say, thank you for being early or on time. We really appreciate that. So for me, that's a bugaboo, number one. Number two is that Lisa has done this for years. And I just think that here's the thing. The other women are taking it personally, which I probably would too, because it just annoys me, but it just shows that Lisa is bad at managing her life. She's just like bad at it. I don't think she, plans and does the things that she needs to do. I think she focuses more on, needing to take 17 hours to look like a doll before she does anything. And so like when your priorities are that, you're not going to put other people's time as a priority. But I think what's really funny is that when Stephanie came into this group, she's the only one who's called her out for it. And it did help, but initially. But here, Lisa's lateness really, she's punished by it because she basically traveled for 24 hours. And then she comes in giggling and trying to avoid the fact that Marisol and Alexia both completely had her number. I love how Marisol calls her Monkey. Monkey comes in and she giggles and she avoids, and they're right. Lisa's a total avoider. She doesn't want to talk about anything real. She doesn't want to be accountable. She doesn't want to have to say, I screwed up or this or that. And again, Lisa comes back. This is what annoys me about Lisa. It always comes back to, I'm going through a lot. So I'm going to talk about, here's a good example of where the OC and Real Housewives of Miami, it's like a tale of two housewives, where on OC, Shannon was late and the group, they were not having it. They called her out. Gina yelled at her and held her accountable. And then Shannon's not late anymore. But Real Housewives of Miami, they have this very interesting dynamic where they're just like, oh, Lisa's Lisa, let's just let her be. And Stephanie's like, no, man, we're not doing that. There are consequences. So the thing is, like, Stephanie, I think she's a control freak in terms of she feels like she can control everything in her life because of her money and her power and all of that. But that's a false sense of control. We can't really control. The only thing we can control as humans is how we think, feel, and choose to react. And think and feel are even, if there's disorders and mental health issues, it's a choice of how to proceed, right? You get my point. All we can control is ourselves. And I think that Stephanie refuses to accept that. And she is trying to teach Lisa a lesson, but Lisa's not going to get that lesson whatsoever. Personally, I'm not a Lisa fan, because not only is the lateness a real problem, but, she keeps saying, I'm having a hard time. But guess what? So is everybody. Okay. Could you imagine if every time I was in an argument with someone, if I was like, well, I have a chronic cancer and I'm not going to survive this. Could you imagine? Like, to win every argument or to just get people to be like, oh yeah, we should treat you special. No, I'm not special. Neither is Lisa. None of these women are. Nobody's special. Okay. Nobody's above like humanity. It's, so that's my take on that. And so at dinner, Alexia and Stephanie, they get into this match. And what's interesting is that Alexia's trying to tell Stephanie that she needs to do X, Y, or Z. And then Stephanie's telling Alexia, you're insecure. And honestly, I think Stephanie's right. I think that Adriana broke the fourth wall in a confessional and talked about Alexia feeling that Stephanie is capable of stealing her spotlight. And that's kind of what I tend to think is happening. Stephanie is a great new addition, and I think she has real staying power, and Miami is good, honey, and they have seasons left. So I think Alexia initially is like friend or foe. But then later we see how, in episode 11 and 12, we see them start to maybe become more of alliances, which I hope, I hope that they are friends. Okay, so in episode 11, Unfollow or Unfriend, we have the stupidest storyline, which is Lars is mad that Lisa didn't unfollow Marcus. Okay. Who gives a shit? Number one. Number two, Lisa claimed the reason she said she was late, by the way, is she had a legal matter. And then Larsa was like, you were in St. Bart's, which is this very bougie island. And so then Lisa claimed to have a legal matter in St. Bart's, and then she claimed that her and Jody made $100,000 commitment. So basically what I read through the lines of this is that Lisa is stressed dealing with the legal issues with Lenny, which we've all seen that in the news. But she and Jody spent $100,000 to go to St. Bart's, and that was her quote unquote commitment. And so she was dealing with issues there, but she was still on vacation. And that's why she was late to this Sevilla trip. And I was like, okay. Seeing the Spanish market literally was like, I have to go to Spain tomorrow. Just the food, the wares, just all of it. It just looked so amazing. And Spanish culture has some of the greatest culinary, specifically Spain has some of the greatest culinary experiences that you'll ever have. Eva Longoria was doing a travel show about Spain and, all the culinary, just like delights that are there. And so, just seeing them eating and all these things, I was like, oh, that looks so good. I was so jealous. One interesting thing is that Kiki discussed the burden of supporting her immigrant family. So Kiki's from Haiti, which is obviously a very poverty-stricken country. She talked about her family members. They all are expecting her to bring them here. But when you bring someone here on a visa, you're responsible for them financially. Like if you watch 90 Day Fiancé, you're responsible when you bring someone over on a visa, that you're financially responsible, physically responsible. I mean, it's a really huge thing. And Kiki was talking about that her family members were mad that she wasn't doing it quick enough or having enough people come over. But you can only do so much to help others without actually drowning yourself. And so different cultures have different expectations about like taking care of ancestors. And in, the Haitian culture, it is an expectation, whereas in other cultures, it's different. And so I think the message is that, you have to understand cultural experiences, but at the same time, Kiki has to put her oxygen mask on first. That is a true analogy. We cannot help others unless we are in a solid place. And so I'm grateful that she drew boundaries, because it doesn't matter if someone's your family, like you can't drown yourself to save somebody else. Can't do it. So if you're doing that right now, please stop and take care of yourself, okay? Alexia started wearing her ring again. Ugh, God, I'm so sick of that storyline. Lisa, we find out she's taking notes on Larsa, and Marisol was like, what are you, a stenographer? Sometimes Marisol, she just says the funniest things in that voice of hers, and it's just like, oh my God, it's hilarious. But then, so going back to Lisa, as soon as in this episode, I had this thought of like, Jody is doing too much. He's too involved. And then as soon as I thought that, he shows up in a confessional. And I was just like, I'm so sick of Jody. But here's the thing. It's not Jody, it's Lisa. Lisa puts her men in positions that they don't need to be in. Like Jody is now her Bobsy twin, her business partner. He's texting Larsa. Stop it, bro. You're doing too much. There is no reason that this man, unless unless Jody and Larsa were friends that pre-existed, like, you know, the relationship with Lisa, or were friends at all, that's one thing. But to text your girlfriend's friend to try to, no. Jody's doing too much and he needs to mind his business, and that was not appropriate. So I'm glad the ladies called that out. But Jody said something like, if she acts like an asshole, we aren't going to treat her nice in response. Okay, bro. Tell me you're emotionally mature without telling me you're emotionally mature. We don't get the privilege of just like being assholes to people just because we feel like it. Meaning if someone's not nice, that doesn't give us an excuse to just like be an asshole. So that didn't even make sense what Jody said. But so Lisa, like I said, she wouldn't unfollow Marcus to prove a point. So here's the thing. Larsa is a little ridiculous, but in this instance with Lisa, I actually believe she has points. Because while who cares about Instagram, it's like, to me, I literally couldn't care less about that. Lisa was also holding on to it as like a power move. And so it was a little bit ridiculous. But my thought about Lisa is, I think she's a chaos addict. She's someone who I think that drama and chaos feed her, and that if she's not constantly in drama and chaos, like she doesn't know what to do with herself. And I don't think she knows that about her either. But I think for me, I get this feeling when I'm watching someone who is like a chaos addict, and I certainly get that feeling with Lisa. Then, speaking of Lisa and Larsa, there was an elevator argument that wasn't filmed where they started screaming at each other. That was a whole thing. And then, like at dinner, Larsa was triggered by the fact that, you know, Lisa shows up to dinner and she's like, you know, she gets this note that she has to, like, within an hour, go sign this thing with a notary. And she's just like completely freaking out, which, listen, that does sound stressful, but like there's a solution to every problem and she was able to figure it out. I cannot believe I'm saying this. I totally understood how Larsa felt, where she is just so sick of Lisa's, you know, this is all about me. I'm going through legal issues. My dad just died. This is so stressful. It's like, it's exhausting already because we all have problems. And Lisa is not the only person in the world, but Lisa really has some narcissistic traits and tendencies. Obviously, that we saw at the narcissism party. She's literally looking in the mirror, taking selfies, completely unaware of the fact that there's anything written on the mirror and what the exercise is about. Very ironic. Actually, not really. Before I move on to OC, at the end of the episode, Adriana tells Kiki to stop being so ratchet, which, to be clear, is a microaggression. And this is why people don't like Adriana, because that's just an asshole thing to say. Kiki is a Black woman. She is a Haitian immigrant. And calling someone ratchet is like basically a euphemism for calling them ghetto or some other slur. And it's absolutely, she knew what she was doing, and it's absolutely not appropriate. But then Julia said that Kiki was overreacting, which is another microaggression, because white women cannot tell women of color how to react, how to feel, what they should do. It's a microaggression. That's, you know, and I was just watching it. My head was absolutely exploding. I think Adriana, have I been saying her name wrong the whole episode? I literally just realized that. Have I been saying Adriana or is it Adriana? Well, damn. If I have been driving you crazy this episode, I'm so sorry. This is the first time I'm really covering Miami, so I will get that right next time. I think she's just projecting her stuff onto other people. So, like, for example, Adriana was saying she felt like talking about Marisol being old and other people being old, and she's like older than everybody. And so I think maybe she's just feeling bad about herself and projecting it. But we can't be saying to women of color that they're ratchet and telling them to calm down. That's not a good look. Okay, so now let us move on to Real Housewives of Orange County. I have to say that like I said, I am not really enjoying Real Housewives of Orange County. I think that it is jumping the shark, and I don't like the constant like content creator stuff and who's lying. It just feels like a hybrid of like a literally traders and housewives, like a game. And I'm just personally not a huge fan of that. But so we start out where Gina and Emily discuss having empathy for what Tamara's going through, but they're also holding her accountable for her behaviors. Gina acknowledged that the therapeutic process, like that Tamara's going to therapy, and the therapeutic process can painfully rip shit open, which is accurate, but that it's not an excuse to be an asshole, which is also accurate. Gina was like, well, you can't be a dick. And Emily was like, well, you can be a dick, but you have to apologize. And she's right. So accountability means actionable change over time, requiring owning our missteps along the way. Trauma is not our fault, but it is our responsibility to fix so we don't spread our pain. So we watched Tamara have a therapy session, which I always love to observe a therapy session for several reasons. I always wonder, like, when a therapist does that on TV, like, what are their motivations? Like, how much of it is for the client? How much of it is for, is it appropriate? I just have a lot of questions about all that. And her therapist said something about her pathology, which I thought was really interesting. She used the term pathology. So pathology is just a word that indicates like, underlying issues that are creating clinically significant problems. That's the best way that I would use to describe it without knowing more about what she meant. And so we watched Tamara talk about like how she's having difficulty navigating tough emotions. And she admitted to when she left the trip in New Orleans, before that, she admitted to taking Xanax in addition to drinking alcohol. And so the one thing I want to be really clear about is Xanax is a benzodiazepine, and those are highly addictive and need to be monitored by a physician when they're utilized for anxiety. It needs to be a short-term temporary or PRN purpose, which is a shorthand for as needed. It's not a medication that's meant to be taken daily, and it's also not a medication that's meant to be mixed with alcohol. So benzodiazepines and alcohol are contraindicated, and mixing the two can have catastrophic events because alcohol is a depressant. So it's a nervous system depressant, and so are benzodiazepines. And respiratory rate, breathing, all of that stuff can be really negatively impacted by mixing those two meds. Tamara's lucky she didn't really have a real issue. And so Tamara basically talked about in therapy that she over-medicated due to fear of abandonment, which is being triggered by Teddy's cancer diagnosis. Do I think that's true? Yes, absolutely. But therapy, like life, is what we make it. And I think sometimes Tamara and most humans have a hard time acknowledging like how we contribute to our own problems. And so I think that her stuff with Teddy is very real. I think her grief is real. It's palpable. Do I also think she needs to manage that and not utilize it as a reason to continue to act out? Also, yes. Also, yes. Listen, I have bad days all the time. I would love to just act out and be like, well, I have cancer. I have like a free hall pass. But unfortunately, that is not how life works. And honestly, I'm the type of person I would rather die than hurt somebody, even a stranger. So that's just for me. That's not in my wheelhouse. The desire to hurt people in the retribution, that is just not how I'm made. So sometimes I think also I have a hard time understanding that because I'm so opposite. I've been really hurt by people who were really supposed to love me, and it hasn't hardened me or turned me black-hearted or something like that. And, I don't know. That's just me. And also I've had a lot of therapy. So. But on the trip, so on the New Orleans trip, Tamara stormed off impulsively and then took to social media announcing her departure from the show. And it's like, remember when everyone on the internet, we were like, what's going on? Tamara quit? And then Emily, Gina, Heather, and Gretchen, they all call out the manipulative nature of Tamara posting a selfie with a mental health is health sticker. Emily said, quote, old ladies having tantrums take to social media. I died. Producers flash back to Tamra fleeing and quitting the show in a similar fashion in Bali, which, by the way, was season 9, episode 16. So that was 10 years ago. So unfortunately, this doesn't make a great case for actionable change over time, aka accountability, Tamra. Doesn't really make a great case for that. You're doing the same shit 10 years later. I don't know. That's all I can say about that. So again, we get to the lateness thing where Shannon shows up late to the airboat, but Gina was super anxious about it because of crocodiles and water and all that stuff. And so like Gina literally freaked out. And it was so clear to me what was happening. Her behavior on the boat was an example of what happens when we experience anxiety. We become physiologically overstimulated and melt down. Gina was clearly, in my opinion, having an anxiety attack. And irritability is a common way that anxiety can be expressed for a lot of people. For me, when I'm irritable, that's how I express my anxiety, is just like irritability. They flash to when the ladies were driving to the airboat, Shannon called Gina and she was crying and sobbing. She was like inconsolable, unintelligible. You couldn't understand what she was saying. She was also having a panic attack, but not all people experience it like that. I don't experience panic attacks like that. I experience them very differently. And so when you experience them differently in the ways that Gina is, sometimes they can get ignored because like Shannon takes the privilege of just like melting down and laying on the floor and just like being helpless. Gina doesn't do that. And so when you don't take the privilege of just learned helplessness, I think Gina gets really frustrated with Shannon because it's like, if I can do this and get my shit together, like, why can't you? But then, the one thing I always used to tell clients is that not everybody's like you. And I have to remind myself of the same thing. Not everybody's like you. Not everybody's capable of the same things, so that's that. But the irony is that as soon as Gina shared what she was experiencing, Shannon cries and she was like, I had an anxiety attack too. And I just rolled my eyes and I was like, this is wild and invalidating. And Gina quipped, let's not out anxiety each other. And I just thought, yes, your lips to God's ears. That's right. So Emily and Heather were arguing about something weird when Gina literally was choking. And I was like, is she going to die? Is someone going to save her? But don't worry, Gina survived so she could carry the bone about this whole stupid storyline, which, oh my God, it already annoys me. Okay, so this is the story. Gina said she spoke to a quote unquote credible journalist who confirmed that Katie told Kiki Monique that Gretchen allegedly was drugged at the Naked Wasted party, which was, again, like 11 years ago at this point. How is it possible that we are back at my coworker allegedly drugged me again? Like I'm having PTSD from Real Housewives of Atlanta because that's what happened with the Phaedra, Candy, and Portia. And now it's like, this is another storyline. And I'm like, how are we here again? I don't like it. I don't like my coworkers trying to drug me and take advantage of me storyline. If we're all beautiful, intelligent women, can we do something better than this storyline? Because it's gross. So what allegedly happened was at a group dinner party composed of Gretchen and Slade, Katie and Matt, Jen and Ryan, Gretchen told everyone that the day after Naked Wasted party, she went to the hospital because she was so sick. Katie alleged that Gretchen said toxicology results revealed she had drugs in her system that she didn't consent to ingesting. A big accusation that Gretchen pretended she didn't make in New Orleans, which is important because at the end of the episode, Katie talks about the dinner party announcement with her husband Matt co-signing, "You didn't make it up." So Katie and Matt said that Slade called them, asking them to lie and quote unquote hold the line to protect Gretchen. So essentially, Katie has been lying again, which personally, I just don't like people who lie a lot. I don't, I have trust issues. And for me, I just don't gravitate towards people like that. So for me, Katie, I'm like, once you prove yourself a liar to me, I'm just like, well, I don't know what to believe. But it sounds like Katie's been lying again to cover up for Gretchen. And then Jen knows everything, but she's pretending to know nothing. And I'm like, what in the Hunger Games Traitors hell is going on this franchise? And then to make things even more confusing, we see a flashback of Gretchen telling Tamra, I did go to the hospital. There's literally, like, if you want to see, I took a screenshot of it, put the captions underneath, and posted it on my Instagram page at Your Bish Therapist. It came out of Gretchen's own mouth. But then in a confessional, Gretchen denied the whole thing. What? So the problem with lying is, like, it's hard to keep your story straight. Now I understand why they take a lie detector next week. And I cannot wait to, I don't know, just figure out what's what, even though a lie detector is not. The reason why it's not admissible in court is because it's based off of a machine detecting your physiological responses. So for people who have empathy and are not psychopaths, when you tell a lie, your breathing, your heart rate increase, you sweat a little bit, you have these physiological indicators of deception. But it's proven to be, you can fake it if you don't have empathy and you don't have feelings. You can pretty much fake a lie detector, and there's reasons why they're not admissible. So, TBD on that. Okay, so before I wrap up, just a couple more things. Emily revealed that her son Luke was having separation anxiety while she was on the cast trip. And I just wanted to say that it's really common with anxiety disorders to experience clinically significant anxiety throughout multiple areas of life. Anxiety is pretty insidious in that way. And then Emily revealed, that Luke, when she came home, regressed and he was using baby talk. And, we see him clinging to her and then her and Shane talking. The whole scene just really broke my heart because it just made me feel so much. I've worked with families like this. I've had the honor of doing that. And I think that parents of children who have more needs than anticipated have to work really hard to manage those extra stressors that can fracture marriages. So parents of children with special needs or, with health issues, physical, mental, whatever, divorce rates are increased because it's anything that adds stressors to a marriage. It's, you have to have a really solid foundation. And I think that Shane and Emily do have a really solid foundation, but it was sad, watching them argue. It broke my heart because they're both grieving and feeling helpless. They're just experiencing it differently. And it's, we all have different approaches to problem solving. I think Shane's solution is to be practical and action oriented, where Emily is seeking validation about the emotional toll that it takes. And I think Emily and Shane argued in ways to me that are characteristic of grieving parents. They're grieving parents who feel helpless and they're feeling judged and, all these other things. Now, Emily feels Shane isn't, I think Shane feels Emily is feeding into his anxiety, and Emily feels Shane isn't validating her emotional experience. Emily noted Shane isn't warm and fuzzy. And so it's just a note that we don't have to be warm and fuzzy, but when our partners need warmth, we need to find ways to meet that need in ways that work for us. So if we don't speak our partner's love language, it's a really good idea to work on becoming fluent, even if it's not ours. And then the last thing I'll say is that Heather confronted Tamra about leaving her in the dust following her dramatic departure, because Heather was riding for Tamra and then Tamra was just and then didn't text her. But Tamra did manage to do podcasts and post on social media, even though she couldn't text Heather. I would have been pissed about that too. But Tamra got angry and, of course, couldn't take any accountability for it, pulling my life is hard. And it's boo-hoo. So is all of us. Okay? Sorry. But the problem is that Heather's feelings are valid, and Tamra says she's going through a lot, which is inherently invalidating and sends a message that there's no room for Heather in that moment. And Heather read that subtext and she just retreated. She was she waved the white flag. She's like, I give up. So again, everyone is dealing with challenges we know nothing about, and suffering isn't a contest or a hall pass for bad behavior. So this is going to be it for me today. I've really enjoyed this extended, extra long recap of Real Housewives of Orange County and Real Housewives of Miami. I'm going to, like I said, I have Mary Payne from Pink Shade coming up, but Mandy and I are going to do another hour. I'm going to have Lindsay and Brady back on the show when Real Housewives of Salt Lake City returns. And until then, I'm going to do some solo recaps about Miami and OC. And I'm very excited for that. So again, if you could all be so kind and please give a 5-star review if you're genuinely enjoying the show. I appreciate it. Wherever you listen to podcasts, please go ahead, do that. Also, if you click my podcast, if you follow the podcast and do automatic downloads, that kind of helps my numbers too, because those numbers have changed and it's about downloads more than listens, which is very frustrating because who downloads a podcast? No, I mean, there are thousands of you who do, and thank you, and I appreciate it. But that's one thing that you could do to help me as well. And again, please follow me at Your Bish Therapist on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Patreon if I didn't already say that. So this was so much fun. Can't wait to do it again. Sending love to you and yours. And ta-ta for now. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.